Ancient stone circles stand silent under the stars, holding secrets for thousands of years. What profound truths did the enigmatic Druids, the masterminds behind these sites, carry with them to their graves? We are about to unravel the hidden codes and lost knowledge of this legendary intellectual elite. By the end of this journey, you will understand the sophisticated system of science, philosophy, and power that they fiercely protected. We will explore why they forbade writing, how they predicted celestial events with stone, and what their final, grim rituals truly meant. What forgotten piece of wisdom do you hope we might rediscover today? These silent stone circles were the work of a highly organized intellectual class. The Druids were far more than robed figures in misty groves. They formed the very backbone of Celtic society. Acting as priests, they mediated between the people and the divine. As judges, they settled legal disputes and could excommunicate individuals from the community, a punishment sometimes feared more than death. They were also the historians, responsible for memorizing the lineages of kings and the epic tales of their people. Their role as philosophers and astronomers meant they studied the natural world to understand the laws of the universe. This was not a single, unified religion, but a diverse and powerful elite spanning from Gaul, what is now France, to Britain and Ireland. A chieftain would rely on his druid for counsel in war and peace, making them central figures in political and social governance. They were, in essence, the masterminds who shaped the culture, laws, and spiritual life of the Celtic world for centuries. This deliberate silence, this refusal to write, is the very heart of the mystery we face today. The Druids believed that true knowledge was a living thing, a sacred power that could not be imprisoned on a page. They committed everything to memory, a tradition passed from master to student through years of rigorous oral training. Imagine learning the entire legal system, the complete history of your people, and the complex movements of the stars, all held perfectly in your mind. This was not a sign of a primitive culture, but a profound spiritual choice. Writing for them would have made knowledge common and stripped it of its potency. It was a force to be carried in the soul, not scanned with the eyes. This immense library of wisdom existed only in the minds of the Druids themselves. And then the world changed. The Roman Empire, with its disciplined legions and its own pantheon of gods, began its relentless expansion into Celtic lands. The Romans saw the Druids not as philosophers, but as a dangerous political and spiritual resistance. They understood that to conquer a people, you must first break their spirit. Roman generals specifically targeted the Druidic order, outlawing their practices, cutting down their sacred groves, and massacring them at their strongholds like the island of Mona. This was a systematic campaign to dismantle the intellectual backbone of Celtic society. The final blow came with the spread of Christianity, which further suppressed the old pagan ways, absorbing some local traditions and erasing others. Within a few generations, the living chain of oral transmission was shattered forever. The last Druid who held the complete, unbroken knowledge took it to the grave, leaving behind only silent stones and fragments of stories told by their enemies. We are left with a ghost of a civilization trying to reconstruct a symphony from a few scattered notes. So we are left with a ghost, but even ghosts cast shadows. The only contemporary written records of the Druids come not from themselves but from their adversaries. We must turn to the pens of Greek and Roman observers like Julius Caesar, Strabo, and Pliny the Elder. Caesar, who encountered the Celts in Gaul, provides some of the most detailed accounts. He describes the Druidic belief in the immortality of the soul, a core tenet of their philosophy. They taught that souls do not die but pass after death from one person to another. This belief, Caesar noted, gave their warriors incredible courage in battle, freeing them from the fear of death. It was a powerful and sophisticated concept. These classical authors also wrote of the Druids' profound reverence for the natural world, seeing divine presence in ancient oak trees, mistletoe, and sacred groves. Pliny the Elder gives us a vivid image of a ritual where a white-robed druid climbs an oak tree to harvest mistletoe with a golden sickle, a plant they believed held the key to fertility and healing. Yet these same sources also contain deeply troubling reports. They speak of human sacrifice, of wicker men filled with living victims and set ablaze as offerings to the gods. This is where we must read with a critical eye. These accounts are not neutral ethnography, they are often political propaganda. The Romans were in the process of conquering and subjugating the Celtic peoples. Portraying the Druids as barbaric practitioners of horrific rites served to justify their own brutal campaigns of eradication. It legitimized the invasion in the eyes of the Roman Senate and people. So what are we to believe? The truth likely lies somewhere in the middle, filtered through layers of fear, misunderstanding, and deliberate exaggeration. These classical sources are unreliable, yet they are invaluable. They are fractured windows into a lost world, giving us glimpses of a complex belief system that we can no longer see clearly. They offer us the tantalizing, imperfect outline of a knowledge system we can only partially reconstruct. The written records give us one perspective, but the earth itself holds a different kind of testimony. We must turn to archaeology to find evidence that the Druids themselves left behind. These silent, physical clues often tell a more ambiguous yet deeply personal story. Take the discovery of Lindo Man in an English peat bog. This was not a skeleton, but a preserved human body from around 2,000 years ago. The details of his death are chillingly specific. He was a healthy young man who suffered a violent triple killing. He was struck on the head, garroted, and his throat was cut. In his stomach, researchers found the remnants of a final meal that included a special, possibly charred griddle cake. This complex ritualistic death mirrors classical accounts of Druidic sacrifice, suggesting a carefully orchestrated offering to the gods. Was he a willing volunteer or an unfortunate victim? The bog keeps its secrets, but his body speaks volumes about a world where such an act held profound, if terrifying, meaning. This reverence for watery places extends beyond human remains. Across northern Europe, archaeologists have pulled magnificent treasures from lakes and peat bogs. Intricate gold torques, beautifully decorated swords, and finely crafted cauldrons were deliberately deposited in these locations, often broken or bent as if to ritually kill the object. These were not lost items, they were gifts to the divine. For a society that did not build grand temples, these natural features were their cathedrals. Lakes, rivers, and bogs were seen as liminal spaces, thresholds to the other world. By giving their most precious possessions to these waters, they were communicating with their gods, perhaps seeking favor, giving thanks, or fulfilling a sacred vow. The sheer value of these offerings underscores the immense spiritual and political power the Druids wielded in orchestrating such acts of devotion. And what of their temples? The search for dedicated Druidic shrines has largely come up empty, and this absence is itself a powerful clue. They did not worship in man-made structures of stone and wood. Their sacred spaces were the natural world itself. A secluded grove of ancient oak trees, a clearing in a deep forest, a ring of standing stones aligned with the heavens, these were their places of power. This tells us their connection to the divine was immediate and rooted in the living earth. The wind in the leaves, the patterns of the stars, the flow of a sacred spring, these were their scriptures. Every ritual, from the harvesting of mistletoe to the observance of the solstice, was performed in this open-air sanctuary. By piecing together these tangible clues, the bog bodies, the ritual deposits, and the sacred groves, we begin to see a worldview emerge that is far more complex than Roman propaganda allowed. It was a philosophy deeply interwoven with the cycles of nature, the power of sacrifice, and the belief in an unseen world that existed just beside our own. These natural cathedrals of oak and stone were not just places of worship, they were the Druids' primary interface with the cosmos. While the great stone circles like Stonehenge and Ogham predate the classical Druids by thousands of years, there is a compelling theory that the Druidic order adopted and used these ancient sites, inheriting their celestial wisdom and continuing their ritual purpose. These monuments functioned as colossal calendars and astronomical observatories engineered with breathtaking precision. At Stonehenge on the summer solstice, the sun rises directly over the heel stone, casting its rays deep into the heart of the circle. This was not a random alignment, it was a dramatic, stone-forged confirmation of the turning year, a moment when the power of the sun was at its peak and the veil between worlds was believed to be thin. The entire layout of these sites, from the outer ring of sarsen stones to the inner horseshoe of trilithons, can be read as a complex diagram of the heavens, tracking the movements of the sun and moon across the seasons. This knowledge was power. By predicting the solstices and equinoxes, the Druids could dictate the timing of planting and harvest, organize great seasonal festivals, and demonstrate their divine connection to the cycles of life and death. They were the keepers of cosmic time, and the stone circles were their clock, but their sacred spaces were not confined to these monumental rings of stone. For every Stonehenge, there were countless nemetons, the sacred groves that served as their more intimate temples. The very word nemeton evokes a sense of a sacred clearing, a precinct set apart. These were not manicured parks, but wild, untouched pockets of ancient forest, often centered around a venerable and mighty oak tree. The oak was considered the most sacred, a symbol of strength and endurance, and the mistletoe that grew upon its branches was seen as a divine gift, a plant that lived between heaven and earth without ever touching the ground. Within the hushed sanctuary of a nemeton, every element was charged with meaning. The rustle of leaves was a divine whisper, the pattern of sunlight on the forest floor was a sacred text, and the very air was thick with presence. Here, the Druids would teach their students, mediate disputes, and perform their most important rituals. This is where the concept of the landscape as both library and cathedral becomes so profound. They did not need written scrolls because their entire world was a living manuscript. The stars above wrote their laws, the changing seasons narrated their history, and the silent, patient trees held the secrets of life itself. To understand the Druids, you must try to see the world through their eyes, not as a resource to be exploited, but as a wholly interconnected web of meaning where every hill, river, and grove was a chapter in a great, unfolding story. But what if a fragment of their secret language was carved in stone and survived after all? Scattered across the landscapes of Ireland and Wales on the edges of weathered standing stones, you can find a cryptic script known as Ogham. It looks like nothing else, a series of straight lines and notches chiseled along the corner of a stone, resembling a secret tally or a complex code. These inscriptions, dating mostly from the early medieval period, consist mostly of names, perhaps marking a territory or commemorating a prominent individual. The simple, stark appearance of Ogham is what fuels a deep and contentious debate. Was this script a later invention by Christian monks, a practical alphabet for writing the Irish language? Or does it represent something far older, a cryptic system derived from the lost knowledge of the Druids themselves? The argument hinges on the script's unique design. Ogham is not based on curves like the Roman or Greek alphabets. It is a series of 20 distinct characters, each formed by a specific number of strokes or notches cutting across a central stem line. This system is incredibly efficient for carving into wood or stone. It feels less like an alphabet for writing long texts and more like a system for making concise, durable marks. Could these strokes and notches be the key to a lost form of Druidic communication? Proponents of the older Druidic origin theory point to its perfect suitability for secrecy. A series of quick, discrete marks on a piece of wood could convey a message that would be utterly meaningless to anyone outside the order. It could have been used to record sacred information, to mark ritual sites, or to pass messages between initiates without attracting the attention of Roman authorities or later religious powers. The fact that many Ogham stones are found along territorial boundaries lends credence to the idea that it was used to assert control and ownership, a function perfectly aligned with the Druids' role as judges and political advisors. The counter-argument, however, is strong. The earliest physical evidence we have for Ogham comes from the 4th or 5th century, a time when Christianity was already establishing itself. It is possible that this was a new creation, a unique written form for a newly literate society. Yet the transition from a purely oral culture to a written one is rarely so clean. Could Ogham represent the final, fossilized remnant of a much older, far more secretive practice? Perhaps the Christian scribes did not invent Ogham from nothing, but adopted and adapted a pre-existing, limited system used by the learned classes, the intellectual descendants of the Druids. The truth is likely layered, like the stones themselves. Ogham may not contain the full, flowing wisdom of the Druidic oral tradition, but it could be our closest link to their mindset. It reflects a world where knowledge was physical, carved into the very landscape, and where communication was both practical and potentially sacred. Each Ogham stone stands as a silent sentinel, a riddle from a time when the line between magic and memory, between the pragmatic and the profound, was beautifully, mysteriously blurred. This silent, carved language of Ogham was one way of marking the world, but the Druids possessed another, even more precise system for inscribing meaning onto time itself. The discovery of the Coligny Calendar in France shattered any lingering notion of them as simple nature priests. This fragmented bronze tablet dating to the 2nd century is a marvel of ancient science. It is a complex lunisolar calendar, a sophisticated device that harmonized the cycles of the moon with the journey of the sun around the Earth. Think of the challenge. A lunar year, based on 12 cycles of the moon, is about 11 days shorter than a solar year. If you only follow the moon, your seasons would slowly drift, and your harvest festivals would eventually arrive in the dead of winter. The Druids solved this with mathematical elegance. Their calendar inserted an extra month every 2.5 years to keep the lunar cycles in perfect sync with the solar seasons. This was not a rough guess, it was a calculated, long-term correction built into the very structure of their timekeeping. The bronze tablet itself is a grid of meticulous markings, detailing months that were alternately 29 and 30 days long, with specific notations for lucky and unlucky days. This object is undeniable proof of their advanced astronomical observation and their formidable skill in mathematics. They were not just watching the sky, they were calculating its rhythms with the precision of an engineer. This mastery of time was the bedrock of their most powerful festivals. The great turning points of the Celtic year were not arbitrary dates on a page. They were precise celestial events, moments when the veil between the human world and the other world was believed to be at its thinnest. Samhain, celebrated around the 1st of November, marked the end of the harvest and the beginning of the dark half of the year. It was a time when the boundaries dissolved, when spirits could walk the earth, and when the Druids could most easily commune with the ancestors. This was the precursor to our modern Halloween, its spooky atmosphere rooted in a genuine, ancient belief in a permeable cosmos. On the opposite side of the wheel of the year was Beltane, around the 1st of May, a fire festival celebrating the return of light and fertility. Imbolc, at the start of February, was a subtle but vital celebration of the first stirrings of spring, dedicated to the goddess Brigid and the returning light. Each of these festivals was locked into its specific place in the solar cycle, a direct response to the sun's power as measured by their advanced calendar. This was not mere ritual, it was a lived expression of a profound philosophy. The Druids saw time not as a straight line, but as a great turning wheel. The year was a circle of constant death and rebirth, from the darkness of Samhain to the blazing light of the summer solstice and back again. Their calendar was the tool that allowed them to navigate this eternal cycle, to align their entire society with the fundamental pulse of the universe. They encoded their deepest connection to the cosmos not in grand temples, but in the very rhythm of their days, their months, and their sacred years. Their bronze calendar was a testament to earthly time, but their true library was the night sky itself. To understand the Druids is to realize they were master astronomers, reading the heavens with an intimacy we have largely lost. Predicting a solar eclipse would have been the pinnacle of their celestial power. While they likely lacked the complex mathematics of later Babylonians, they possessed something else, a deep, generational memory of celestial patterns. By tracking the cycles of the moon with obsessive precision, they would have noticed a rhythm, a recurring pattern of lunar and solar alignments that repeat every 18 years. This long cycle, known today as the Saros cycle, would have allowed them to forecast the terrifying moment when the sun was swallowed by the moon's shadow. Imagine the awe and control this inspired. To stand before a chieftain and his people and declare the impending darkness not as a catastrophe, but as a known, predicted event, was to wield the power of a god. This was not mere stargazing, it was a profound demonstration that they understood the very mechanics of the cosmos. Their knowledge extended far beyond eclipses. They would have tracked the wandering paths of the planets, those stars that did not follow the fixed patterns of the others. Venus, the brilliant morning and evening star, would have held special significance, perhaps seen as a celestial messenger. The constellation we call Orion, with its distinctive belt, may have been a hunter or a god in their stories. The Pleiades cluster, its faint shimmer marking the onset of winter, was almost certainly a seasonal marker. These star patterns were not just pretty lights, they were the chapters and verses of a cosmic story. The entire celestial sphere was a grand mnemonic device, a vast, rotating map that helped them preserve an immense body of knowledge. The myth of a great boar in the stars might encode the season for hunting. The story of a heroic figure chasing a bear across the heavens could perfectly chart the circular path of the constellations around the North Star. This oral tradition, woven into epic tales and poetry, was how they remembered. It was a living, breathing science where navigation for long sea voyages, the precise timing for planting crops, and the dates for all major religious ceremonies were all written in the stars. Their ability to function as the intellectual core of their society depended entirely on this celestial literacy. The sky was their clock, their calendar, and their sacred text, all fused into one brilliant, ever-turning wheel of light. This vast celestial library was useless without a perfect human memory to access it. The Druids' most astonishing intellectual feat was their oral tradition, a mental fortress they built to protect their knowledge. Initiates into the Druidic order embarked on a training regimen that could last for 2 full decades. Their task was to commit to memory an almost unimaginable volume of information, not just the gist of it, but the exact words recited verbatim. Think of memorizing the entire legal code of a nation, the complete genealogical history of every ruling family, thousands of lines of sacred poetry, complex astronomical data, and profound philosophical teachings, all without ever writing down a single note. This was not rote learning as we understand it. It was a sacred act of internalization, a process of weaving knowledge directly into the fabric of their consciousness. How could any human mind achieve such a feat? They almost certainly relied on sophisticated mnemonic techniques that transformed abstract information into vivid, unforgettable mental landscapes. Poetic meter and strict rhyme schemes were not merely artistic choices, they were powerful memory tools. The rhythmic, musical quality of verse makes it far easier to recall than plain prose. A complex legal precedent or a star's position could be locked into a precise poetic form, turning dry data into a song that resonated in the mind. But they likely went even further, anchoring this knowledge to the physical world around them. This is the method of loci or memory palace technique on a grand scale. A student might mentally walk through a sacred grove, associating a specific tree with a specific king's lineage. A particular standing stone could represent a point of law, and the flow of a river might chart the movement of a constellation. The entire natural world became a three-dimensional filing system. Every hill, stream, and forest path was a bookmark in a living encyclopedia. This method was far more than simple memorization. It was a form of profound spiritual and intellectual encryption. The knowledge was not just stored, it was hidden in plain sight, encoded in poetry and tied to the landscape. An outsider hearing a Druid recite a beautiful, flowing poem about a hunter and a stag would simply hear a story. But for the initiated, that same poem was a dense data stream containing navigational charts for sea travel, astronomical markers for the changing seasons, and the historical records of a royal bloodline. The very structure of their learning protected it. You could not simply steal a scroll, you had to earn the key through years of disciplined initiation. This explains why they so vehemently rejected writing. To put this knowledge on a page would be to break the encryption, to strip it of its protective layers and make it vulnerable to anyone who could read. Their wisdom was a living, breathing entity, inseparable from the trained minds that carried it and the sacred land that gave it form. When the last of these master memorizers died, we did not just lose a collection of facts, we lost the entire operating system for a civilization. Within this intricate mental fortress, a different kind of voice carried the knowledge forward. The bards were the poets and musicians, the public face of a tradition the Druids kept secret. They were often the junior members, the students within the Druidic order, undergoing the same rigorous memory training but specializing in a different art. While a senior Druid might hold the sacred legal precedents in his mind, a bard held the epic tales of kings and heroes. His role seemed like entertainment, a performer singing for his supper in the chieftain's hall, but this was a dangerous underestimation of his true purpose. Every song was a lesson, and every story was a carefully preserved record. When a bard recited the genealogy of a ruling family, he was not just flattering his patron, he was reciting a legal document that established land rights and political legitimacy, all from memory. His poems were the history books of a people who wrote nothing down. A seemingly simple tale about a mythical hunt could encode the migratory patterns of deer or the location of a hidden freshwater spring. The rhythmic, rhyming structure of their verses was not just for beauty, it was the perfect mnemonic container, ensuring that vital information was passed from generation to generation without a single word being changed. The bard was a living, breathing hard drive for his entire culture. He was the essential link between the esoteric knowledge of the Druids and the everyday life of the tribe, translating a complex worldview into stories that anyone could understand and remember. His songs about gods walking the earth and magical cauldrons of plenty were not mere fantasy. They were the vehicle for the Druidic understanding of the otherworld, the immortality of the soul, and the sacredness of the natural world. So the next time you hear an old folk song or an epic poem, listen more closely. You might be hearing the last, faint echo of a lost way of knowing, where history was not read from a page but sung from the heart. The songs of the bards and the precision of the calendar point toward a complete and unified worldview. Reconstructing the core of Druidic philosophy is like assembling a mosaic from shattered tiles, but the emerging picture reveals a system of startling depth. Central to their belief was the doctrine of the transmigration of souls. Classical authors like Caesar recorded that the Druids taught souls do not perish but pass after death from one body to another. This was not a vague hope but a foundational principle that shaped their entire culture. It meant that death was not an end but a pause in a very long journey. This belief, they said, freed their warriors from the fear of death, giving them unparalleled courage in battle, but its implications ran far deeper than martial bravery. If the soul was immortal and cycled through many lives, then all of life was fundamentally interconnected. You were not merely an individual, but a link in an endless chain of existence, a temporary vessel for an eternal spirit. This fostered a profound respect for all living things, a sense that the spark within a person was the same spark within an animal, a tree, or a spring. This interconnectedness was the fabric of their reality. They did not see a world of separate objects, but a single, living organism. Every natural phenomenon was sacred because it was a manifestation of the divine. A thunderstorm was not just weather, it was the voice of a god. An ancient oak was not just a tree, it was a pillar holding up the sky, its roots delving into the other world. The mistletoe growing upon it was a symbol of this sacred relationship, a plant that existed between worlds, drawing life without touching the earth. Their gods were not distant figures on a mountain, but immanent forces present in every rock, river, and gust of wind. The divine was here now, pulsing through the world around them. This philosophy demanded balance above all else. The great wheel of the year, with its cycle of light and dark, growth and decay, was the ultimate expression of a universe governed by complementary forces. A festival like Samhain acknowledged the necessity of death for life to continue. Beltane celebrated the raw, fertile power of creation. One could not exist without the other. This was a sophisticated understanding that saw the cosmos as a self-regulating system of give and take. Their rituals were not about worshipping a distant king, but about maintaining this delicate equilibrium. A sacrifice, whether a precious sword in a bog or, in their most extreme acts, a human life, was seen as a necessary offering to restore balance, to give back energy to ensure the continued turning of the wheel. Their entire purpose was to act as intermediaries, using their knowledge to read the signs of the world and perform the correct actions to keep the universe in harmony. They were the stewards of a sacred contract between humanity, the land, and the cosmos, a role born from a profound belief that everything was alive, everything was connected, and everything possessed a spirit worthy of reverence. This intricate web of interconnectedness required a powerful social glue, a set of rules that governed not just the tribe but the individual soul. This brings us to the mysterious and potent concept of the jays. A jays was a sacred prohibition, a personal taboo placed upon an individual, often from birth. It was not a simple law or a piece of advice, it was a mystical injunction that bound a person's fate. To break your jays was to invite cosmic disaster, an unraveling of your personal luck and the very order of the world around you. These prohibitions were deeply personal and often seemed bizarre or arbitrary. A hero might be forbidden from eating the flesh of a dog. A king might be prohibited from traveling on a certain day of the week. A warrior could be sworn never to refuse a challenge. These were not suggestions, they were absolute commands woven into the fabric of a person's destiny. The origins of these powerful taboos almost certainly lie within the Druidic sphere. As the judges, lawmakers, and seers of Celtic society, the Druids were the ones who could pronounce a jays, interpreting the will of the gods and the demands of the cosmic balance to set a person on their correct path. A jays was a tool for maintaining order, a way to channel a person's immense power, whether as a king or a warrior, in a way that served the community and upheld harmony. It was a form of sacred contract between the individual and the universe, mediated by the Druids' deep understanding of fate. The legendary Irish hero Cuchulainn provides the most famous and tragic example of this system in action. He labored under two primary jesa. The first was a prohibition against eating the flesh of a dog, an animal sacred to his patron goddess. The second was an obligation to never refuse an offer of food from a woman. Can you see the terrible trap? These two sacred commands existed in perfect, dreadful balance until the day an old hag offered him a meal of roasted dog. He was caught in an impossible bind, forced to violate one sacred law to uphold the other. He chose to eat the meal, breaking the dog taboo and setting in motion the chain of events that led to his early death. This story is not just a thrilling piece of mythology, it is a profound lesson in the Druidic worldview. It illustrates that their sense of order was not about simple good and evil, but about the delicate maintenance of balance. A jays was a kind of spiritual circuit breaker, a personalized rule designed to prevent a person's inherent power from spiraling out of control and disrupting the cosmos. For a king, a jays might prevent him from acting with arrogance, forcing humility upon him to ensure his reign was just and the land remained fertile. For a common person, it might be a simpler prohibition that kept them in alignment with their clan's totem animal or local spirit. This system of personal codes created a society where every individual's actions were seen as intrinsically linked to the health of the whole. Your personal honor was not just about your reputation, it was about upholding your sacred contracts and thus keeping the world in balance. To break your jays was to tear a hole in the fabric of reality itself, a transgression that demanded a terrible price. The sacred groves were not just temples but vast pharmacies. The Druids' deep knowledge of the plant world was a form of natural magic, blending sharp empirical observation with profound spiritual belief. They understood that the forest floor and the meadow held potent remedies, poisons, and gateways to other states of consciousness. This intimate relationship with flora was central to their role as healers and intermediaries with the divine. Their most revered plant was mistletoe, especially the rare variety found growing on an oak tree. The Roman writer Pliny the Elder left us a vivid account of a ritual that highlights its sacred status. A white-robed druid would climb the mighty oak, using a golden sickle to carefully cut the mistletoe, ensuring it never touched the ground. The plant was caught in a white cloth, as it was believed its power would be desecrated by contact with the earth. Why such reverence for a simple parasitic plant? To the Druids, mistletoe was a paradox, a symbol of life in the dead of winter. It grew between heaven and earth, rooted not in the soil but in the bark of the most sacred tree. They saw it as the soul of the oak, a manifestation of divine power that could cure illnesses, act as an antidote to poisons, and bestow fertility upon people and livestock. Its white berries, resembling droplets of sacred semen, reinforced its association with life and vitality. This was not superstition, it was a sophisticated interpretation of natural phenomena. Modern science has since found that certain species of mistletoe do indeed contain compounds with potential anti-cancer and immune-boosting properties, validating the Druids' ancient intuition that this plant held a unique, life-giving force. But the oak itself was the anchor of their botanical world. Its strength, longevity, and prodigious production of acorns made it a symbol of endurance, sovereignty, and sustenance. A grove of ancient oaks was the ultimate sanctuary, a living library of power. The bark and leaves of the oak contain tannic acid, which has well-known astringent properties, useful for treating wounds and skin conditions. The Druids would have learned through generations of trial and observation which plants could heal a fever, which could numb a pain, and which could induce visions. The yew tree, another species deeply associated with Druidic sites, presents a darker duality. Every part of the yew is highly toxic, a fact the Druids would have known all too well. Its needle-like leaves and bright red berries could bring a swift and painful death. Yet the yew was also a powerful symbol of immortality, often planted in graveyards. Its incredible longevity, with some specimens living for thousands of years, and its ability to regenerate with new trees sprouting from its own decaying trunk, made it a perfect representation of the Druidic belief in the eternal cycle of death and rebirth. They may have used its potent toxins with extreme care, perhaps in minute doses for their numbing or psychoactive properties, or as a component in the poisons used for hunting or in ritual sacrifices. This deep botanical knowledge would have appeared as pure magic to the common farmer or warrior. To see a druid brew a tea that could stop a child's fever or apply a poultice that healed a festering wound was to witness a miracle. It confirmed their status as those who could commune with the invisible forces of nature and harness them for the good of the tribe. Their understanding of chemistry and medicine, framed within a spiritual context, was a core source of their authority. When they harvested a plant, it was not merely a physical act but a spiritual negotiation. They would offer prayers and perhaps even offerings to the spirit of the plant before taking its life, acknowledging the sacred exchange. This worldview saw every root, leaf, and berry as a vessel of spiritual energy, a gift from the earth that required respect and ritual to unlock its true power. Their herbalism was a perfect fusion of science and soul, a practice where healing the body and honoring the divine were one and the same sacred act. The forest itself was a living text, and its creatures were the sacred letters of its alphabet. Celtic art and mythology overflow with powerful animal figures, each one a key to understanding the Druidic view of the world. These were not mere decorations on a shield or a torque. They were profound symbols, a visual language encoding complex spiritual and philosophical ideas. Take the mighty stag, one of the most revered creatures. With its majestic antlers that fall and regrow each year, it was a living emblem of the cycle of death and rebirth, a core tenet of Druidic belief. But the stag represented something even greater: sovereignty. To be worthy of kingship, a leader had to be in harmony with the land itself, and the stag, as the lord of the forest, embodied this sacred connection. A king who lost his right to rule was often described in myths as being gored by a stag, a clear sign that his bond with the sovereignty of the land had been broken. Then there is the boar, a creature of raw, ferocious power. In a culture that celebrated martial prowess, the boar was the ultimate symbol of the warrior spirit. It was fearless, relentless, and incredibly dangerous even in its death throes. Celtic helmets and sword scabbards were often decorated with boar imagery, not just as a hope for strength, but as an invocation of the boar's untamed ferocity in battle. To wear the boar was to channel its indomitable spirit, yet the Druids also venerated a very different kind of power, the power of hidden wisdom. For this, they looked to the salmon. In one of the most famous Irish myths, the salmon of knowledge swims in a sacred pool, eating the hazelnuts of wisdom that fall from 9 enchanted trees. The first person to taste this salmon would gain all the world's knowledge. This story is a perfect metaphor for the Druidic pursuit of esoteric wisdom. The salmon, swimming in the deep, dark waters, represents knowledge that is not easily accessible, hidden in the depths of the world and the human mind. The hazelnuts, a fruit of the sacred tree of wisdom, are the individual pieces of insight that, when consumed and internalized, lead to enlightenment. The pursuit of this salmon was the pursuit of the Druids themselves. And what of the crow, or its larger cousin, the raven? These dark birds were deeply associated with prophecy and the other world. Their harsh cries were seen as messages, their flight patterns a form of divination. In battle, they were creatures of the Morrigan, a powerful goddess of both war and fate. The crow was a liminal creature, a scavenger that existed between life and death, feeding on the aftermath of conflict. It represented the harsh reality of fate and the ability to see the patterns of what was to come. This rich symbolic system extended to countless other animals. The horse was a symbol of speed, vitality, and the sun itself, often linked to goddesses of sovereignty. The bull represented immense strength, wealth, and virility. The hound was a sign of loyalty, healing, and the hunt, but could also be a guardian of the other world. Each creature was a totem, a spiritual emblem that helped people understand different aspects of the human condition and the divine. A warrior might meditate on the spirit of the boar to find courage. A judge might contemplate the salmon to seek deeper insight for a difficult ruling. A seer would listen for the voice of the crow to interpret the will of the gods. This was not primitive animism, but a highly developed symbolic code. The natural world was a mirror, and by studying the qualities of animals, the Druids and their people could better understand the forces at work within themselves and the universe. The stag taught them about cyclical renewal, the boar about raw courage, the salmon about the pursuit of hidden truth, and the crow about the acceptance of fate. In a world without written texts, these animal symbols were a universal language, a way to carry and transmit the most complex ideas about life, death, power, and wisdom for generations. This grim logic brings us to the most difficult aspect of Druidic practice to reconcile: the ritual of human sacrifice. The classical sources are filled with horrific accounts of wicker men set ablaze with living victims trapped inside, of throats slit over altars to appease bloodthirsty gods. Yet to dismiss this as simple barbarism is to misunderstand the profound, if terrifying, worldview that gave it meaning. The discovery of Lindoman offers a chillingly personal window into this ritual reality. Here was a healthy young man, his body preserved for 2,000 years in a peat bog, who suffered a meticulously orchestrated triple death. He was struck on the head, garroted, and his throat was cut with the remnants of a special griddle cake found in his stomach. This was not a messy murder, it was a ceremonial killing following a specific sacred formula. So why would a society with such advanced knowledge engage in such an act? The theories are varied and complex. One possibility is that these were criminals or social outcasts, offered to the gods as a form of capital punishment that also served a higher spiritual purpose. In a world where the community's well-being was paramount, removing a disruptive individual in this way purified the tribe and restored balance. Another, more unsettling theory suggests that the victim could be a person of high status, even a failed king. In the Druidic understanding of sovereignty, the king was married to the land. If the land became barren or strife plagued the people, it was a sign the king had lost his sacred right to rule. His ritual sacrifice, a return of his life force to the earth, was a desperate attempt to restore fertility and cosmic order. This was the ultimate expression of their belief in a sacred contract where the leader's life was forfeit for the good of all. But the most crucial key to understanding this practice lies in their core belief in the immortality of the soul. For the Druids, death was a doorway, not an end. The soul was an eternal substance that merely passed from one vessel to another. From this perspective, a sacrificial death was not a cruel annihilation but a potent transaction. What greater gift could you offer the gods than the very essence of a human soul, the most precious energy in the cosmos? This life force, willingly or forcibly given, was believed to possess immense power to appease angry deities, ensure a bountiful harvest, or bolster the tribe's fortune in a coming war. It was the ultimate act of reciprocity, a desperate attempt to feed energy back into the cosmic cycle to maintain the balance of the world. The victim was a messenger to the other world, their death a brutal prayer for life itself. While our modern sensibilities recoil at the violence within their framework of an eternal, cycling soul, the act held a grim, sacred logic. It was the darkest expression of a philosophy that saw all of existence as a continuous, interconnected exchange of energy, where even the most terrible of sacrifices was performed to keep the great wheel of life turning. This radical belief in an eternal soul transformed the very fabric of daily life. Julius Caesar recorded that the Druids were particularly insistent on one core doctrine: the soul does not die, but after death passes from one person to another. This was not a vague promise of a distant heaven, but a confident assertion of a cyclical journey. They taught that life was merely a single chapter in a very long book, and death was simply the turning of a page. For the Celtic warrior, this philosophy was a psychological superweapon. Why fear a blade in battle if you know your spirit will simply find a new home? This belief cultivated a legendary fearlessness, allowing warriors to charge into combat with an abandon that stunned and bewildered their more mortal-fearing Roman opponents. But the implications reached far beyond the battlefield. This worldview minimized the tragedy of individual death, reframing it as a natural transition within the grand, turning wheel of existence. It fostered a culture that valued honor and legacy over mere survival, because your actions in this life would echo into the next incarnation of your soul. Where did this soul travel between lives? The myths suggest a paradisiacal otherworld, a realm of perpetual youth and feasting, often located just beyond the veil of the familiar, across the Western Sea, or hidden within the ancient burial mounds that dotted the landscape. This was not a place of reward or punishment, but a peaceful, joyful resting ground where souls were refreshed before beginning their next journey back into the world of the living. This concept of a blissful otherworld accessible to all was a profound departure from the grim underworlds of many contemporary cultures. It made the afterlife a destination to be embraced, not feared. This entire spiritual framework was the bedrock of the Druids' unique philosophical code. While other societies saw life as a linear march toward an uncertain end, the Druids perceived a beautiful, endless cycle. Their entire purpose was to understand the rules of this cycle and to guide their people in living in harmony with it. This set them apart as not just priests, but as profound thinkers who offered a coherent and empowering answer to humanity's oldest and most terrifying question. This profound worldview, however, was about to collide with an empire that saw it not as philosophy, but as a threat to be eradicated. The Roman war machine, disciplined and relentless, began its methodical conquest of Celtic lands. Roman generals quickly identified the Druids not merely as priests, but as the intellectual and spiritual leaders of the fierce resistance they faced. To conquer the Celtic tribes, Rome understood it must first shatter their cultural core. The island of Mona, known today as Anglesey in Wales, became the final stronghold and the scene of a brutal final confrontation. Roman historians describe the chilling scene that met their legions as they crossed the strait. On the opposite shore, a chaotic army of warriors shrieked and howled, but it was the Druidic figures behind them that truly struck fear into the Roman hearts. Women dressed in funeral black, their hair wild like furies, ran through the ranks holding torches aloft. The Druids themselves stood with their hands raised to the sky, shouting terrible curses against the invaders. The air was thick with the smoke of sacrificial fires. The Roman soldiers, momentarily frozen by this supernatural display, had to be sternly ordered forward by their commander. What followed was a massacre. The defenders were cut down, the sacred groves of oak were systematically desecrated and burned to the ground, and the Druidic altars were soaked in their own blood. This was not just a military victory, it was a deliberate act of cultural annihilation. The Romans outlawed Druidic practices across their new territories, understanding that by silencing these masterminds, they could more easily control the conquered population. The living chain of oral knowledge was dealt a near-fatal blow, but the final dismantling of the old order came not from the sword but from the cross. As Christianity spread through the former Celtic lands, it engaged in a complex process of absorption and suppression. The new faith was often pragmatic, building its own churches on ancient sacred sites to co-opt their spiritual power. The old gods were demoted to saints, demons, or fairies in the popular imagination. The story of St. Patrick in Ireland is a powerful example where he is said to have used the native shamrock, a three-leafed clover, to explain the concept of the Holy Trinity, effectively repurposing a local symbol for a new religion. The great seasonal festivals like Samhain and Beltane were gradually transformed into All Saints' Day and May Day, their pagan edges smoothed over by Christian tradition. What could not be absorbed was simply outlawed. The formal Druidic order, with its decades-long training and its powerful political influence, could not survive in this new world. The role of the learned man was gradually taken over by the Christian monk, who preserved knowledge not in his memory, but in beautifully illuminated manuscripts written in Latin. Within a few generations, the last Druids who held the complete, unbroken lineage of their knowledge died without successors. The sophisticated understanding of the cosmos, the complex legal codes, the thousands of lines of sacred poetry, all of it faded from living memory, leaving behind only the silent stones, the fragments of myth, and a ghost of the wisdom that once was. The great library of the Celtic mind was closed forever, its books scattered to the wind. Yet even after the last Druid fell, their shadow lingered in the stories people told. Centuries later, in the quiet scriptoriums of medieval monasteries, scribes began to write down the ancient oral tales of their Celtic ancestors. These manuscripts, like the Welsh Mabinogion and the Irish Ulster Cycle, became a kind of literary archaeology, preserving a world that had long since vanished. Within these pages, we find characters of immense power and wisdom who feel strangely familiar. They are the surviving echoes of the Druids, transformed by time and storytelling into legendary magicians and prophets. Consider the Irish Druid Cathbad from the Ulster Cycle. He is not a vague sorcerer, but a precise reflection of the historical Druids' multifaceted role. Cathbad is a teacher leading a school of young pupils. He is a judge interpreting law and prophecy. Most importantly, he is a seer. In one famous tale, a young queen asks him what the present hour is auspicious for. Cathbad declares that a warrior conceived at that very moment would have a name forever sung in glory and would perform legendary deeds. Upon hearing this, the queen immediately takes the king to bed, and the hero Cu Chulainn is conceived. This is not mere magic, it is the ultimate expression of the Druid's power to shape destiny through his knowledge of cosmic timing and sacred law, a direct narrative echo of their real-world authority. Across the sea in Wales, the figure of Myrddin, who would later evolve into the Merlin of Arthurian legend, embodies another facet of the Druidic archetype. He is the wild man of the forest, living in a state of nature, gifted with prophetic vision and the ability to communicate with animals. This mirrors the historical Druids' deep connection to the natural world as their sacred space and source of knowledge. Myrddin's madness and his retreat into the wilderness can be read as a powerful metaphor for the traumatic destruction of the Druidic order, his prophetic ramblings a symbol of their fragmented wisdom surviving in a broken form. These literary figures are not historical accounts, they are cultural memories, romanticized and reshaped by centuries of oral transmission. They preserved the essence of what people remembered or imagined about the Druids, their awe-inspiring power to counsel kings, to see the future, and to command the forces of nature. The medieval Christian scribes who recorded these stories were often ambivalent about these pagan characters, sometimes portraying them as wise advisors and other times as dangerous sorcerers. Yet by writing them down, they inadvertently saved the last ghostly imprint of a lost intellectual elite. The legendary Merlin does not simply possess magic, he holds ancient knowledge. He orchestrates the birth of a king through prophecy and manipulation, much as a historical Druid would have influenced political succession. He is a shapeshifter, a master of disguise and perception, reflecting the Druidic art of seeing the world from multiple perspectives. These characters are the containers into which a culture poured its memory of a once great wisdom tradition. They are the palimpsest upon which the faded text of Druidism can still be faintly read, a final, narrative monument to the masterminds who once guided a civilization. Their literary ghosts would not rest quietly in the pages of old manuscripts. Centuries after the last true Druid perished, a new fascination began to stir across Europe, born not from living memory, but from a deep, romantic longing. The 18th and 19th century Romantic and Celtic revivals looked back at the ancient past through a misty, sentimental lens. They saw in the crumbling stone circles and the fragments of myth a pure, natural wisdom that their own industrialized world had lost. This powerful nostalgia gave birth to the first modern Druid orders. The most famous of these, the Ancient Order of Druids, was founded in London in 1781. It is crucial to understand that this was not a secret surviving lineage suddenly revealing itself. It was a reinvention, a beautiful and creative act of imagination. These early revivalists had no living teachers, no unbroken chain of oral tradition to guide them. Their only sources were the very same classical texts we rely on today, the accounts written by Caesar and Pliny, filtered through a romantic desire for a more mystical, connected past. They built their rituals and their philosophy on this fragmentary foundation, blending it with Masonic-style fraternal structures and a heavy dose of poetic idealism. Their gatherings were often social and philanthropic, a far cry from the politically powerful intellectual class of old, yet they served a profound new purpose. They were keeping the idea of the Druid alive, transforming a lost historical figure into a potent symbol of nature, wisdom, and national identity. From this initial spark, modern Druidry has blossomed into a remarkably diverse and vibrant tapestry. Today, you will find spiritual paths that all call themselves Druidic, yet they walk in different directions. Some follow a clearly neo-pagan path, venerating the old Celtic gods and goddesses and celebrating the eightfold wheel of the year, seeing their practice as a living, evolving spirituality deeply rooted in the earth. Others identify as cultural Druids, focusing on the language, music, art, and folklore of the Celtic nations as a way to honor their heritage without necessarily adhering to a specific religious belief. There are also philosophical Druids who are drawn to the ethical and metaphysical framework, the concepts of balance, truth, and the pursuit of wisdom, much like one might study Stoicism or Buddhism. This beautiful diversity is not a sign of confusion, but a powerful testament. It proves that the allure of the Druids was never just about the historical facts of who they were. It is about the enduring human need for what they represent, a deep connection to the natural world, a reverence for knowledge, and a longing to find our place within the great turning wheel of existence. The modern Druid, in all their forms, is not an archaeologist trying to excavate a perfect replica of the past. They are a gardener planting new seeds in ancient soil, hoping to cultivate a little of that lost wisdom for a world that needs it now more than ever. This romantic revival, however, came with a significant cost to the truth. The very longing that resurrected the Druid in the popular imagination also paved the way for a host of modern myths that often obscure the real historical figures. One of the most persistent misconceptions is the direct link between the Druids and the construction of Stonehenge. The iconic image of white-robed figures processing among the massive trilithons is a powerful one, but it is a chronological impossibility. The main phases of Stonehenge were completed over 1,000 years before the first Druids appear in the historical record. The classical Druids of Caesar's time may well have used the ancient site, inheriting its celestial alignments and imbuing it with their own sacred significance, but they were not its architects. They were the inheritors of a tradition, not its founders. This distinction is crucial, for it shifts our understanding of them from mythical builders of impossible monuments to sophisticated intellectuals who recognized and repurposed a legacy of ancient science. Another pervasive modern invention is the concept of ley lines, those hypothetical straight lines said to connect ancient sacred sites. The idea was first proposed in the 1920s, and while it is a captivating notion of a hidden energy grid across the landscape, there is no archaeological or historical evidence that the Druids or any ancient people recognized or built sites along such lines. The alignments we do find, such as at Stonehenge, are almost exclusively celestial, pointing to the solstice sun or the standstill moon, not to other distant man-made points on the map. Attributing ley lines to the Druids is a classic case of projecting a modern spiritual idea onto the past, dressing it in ancient robes to lend it a false sense of antiquity. Perhaps the most common oversimplification is the reduction of the Druids to simple, generic nature worshippers. While their reverence for the natural world was absolute, it was not a vague, feel-good spirituality. It was a complex and demanding philosophical system. They were not just tree huggers, they were the judges, historians, scientists, and political strategists of their society. Their connection to nature was the foundation of their power, the source of their legal authority, and the basis of their advanced understanding of astronomy, medicine, and time. To see them only as peaceful sages chanting in groves is to ignore their role in presiding over rituals of life and death, in advising kings on matters of war, and in memorizing a vast body of knowledge that governed every aspect of Celtic life. Why do these modern myths hold such power over us? They speak to a deep desire for a lost golden age, a time when wise sages lived in perfect harmony with the earth. The real Druids, however, are far more interesting. They were a pragmatic and powerful intellectual elite whose worldview was both spiritually profound and rigorously practical. By separating the romantic fiction from the historical fact, we do not diminish their legacy, we honor its true complexity. We trade a comfortable fantasy for a challenging and fascinating reality, a reality where the pursuit of knowledge was a sacred duty, and the natural world was not just a place of beauty, but a living, breathing library of divine law. But if the stones and the stars hold only part of the story, where else can we search for their voice? The answer may lie not in the landscape, but in the very words they spoke. The ancient Celtic languages, from Gaulish on the European continent to Old Irish and Brythonic in the British Isles, are a fragmented code waiting to be deciphered. This is the realm of philology, the love of words, a discipline that treats language like an archaeological site. By carefully excavating the root meanings of ancient terms, we can begin to reconstruct entire concepts that have been lost to time. Think of a single word as a time capsule. When we analyze the name of a god, we are not just learning a title, we are uncovering a job description. Take the Gaulish god Lugus, who becomes Lug in Ireland. His name is linguistically linked to the Latin word for light, lux, but also to the Old Irish for lynx, an animal known for its piercing sight. This suggests a deity not just of light, but of brilliance, of piercing intelligence and far-seeing vision. He was likely the patron of all arts and crafts, the master of every skill. This single name unlocks a core Druidic value, a reverence for comprehensive knowledge and enlightened perception. Similarly, the goddess Brigid, whose name likely means the Exalted One, was associated with poetry, healing, and smithcraft. Her name is a key that opens a door to a worldview where creativity, medicine, and the transformative power of fire were seen as interconnected forces, all flowing from a single, exalted source. This linguistic detective work extends to the very land beneath our feet. Place names are often the oldest historical records we have. The name of the river Danube, ancient Danuvius, derives from a root meaning to flow. The frequent occurrence of place names containing the element Dunham, meaning fortress or stronghold, across Gaul and Britain, maps out a landscape of ancient power centers. And what of the sacred groves, the nemetons? The word itself survives in place names like Nematobriga in Spain, meaning the sacred hill of the Brigantes. Every time we use such a name, we are unconsciously speaking a ghost of the Druidic world, invoking a space that was once considered holy. By comparing these words across different Celtic languages and mythologies, a comparative technique, we can start to see a coherent picture emerge. The same core ideas of sovereignty, sacredness, and cosmic order appear again and again, expressed in slightly different dialects but pointing to a shared philosophical foundation. Language itself becomes our most intimate artifact, a whisper of how they categorized their universe, what they feared, and what they revered. Each syllable is a clue, and every reconstructed word is another piece of the mosaic, helping us to slowly, painstakingly, read the world as the Druids themselves once did. So what unified these threads of memory, symbol, and star into a single, living philosophy? We can attempt to reconstruct the Druidic code not as a singular cipher to be cracked, but as a sophisticated operating system for an entire civilization. This was not a book of laws left on a shelf, but a dynamic, interwoven framework designed to preserve a complete understanding of the cosmos. At its heart was the oral tradition, the formidable mental architecture that stored the data. Their mnemonic techniques transformed the landscape itself into a three-dimensional library, where every oak grove and river bend served as a bookmark for a legal precedent or a celestial event. This internal storage system was then encrypted through a rich symbolic language. The straight lines of Ogham provided a concise, physical script for marking territory or perhaps sacred knowledge. The stag, the salmon, and the crow were not just animals, they were living emblems of sovereignty, hidden wisdom, and prophetic fate, a visual shorthand for complex philosophical ideas. This symbolic code was constantly cross-referenced with their astronomical calendar, a precise celestial clock that governed the rhythm of their rituals and their society. The turning wheel of the year, marked by solstices and the great fire festivals, was the practical output of this system, aligning human activity with the fundamental pulse of the universe. And governing all of it were the Jisa, the sacred personal prohibitions. These were not arbitrary rules, but the ethical and spiritual algorithms of the code, personalized commands designed to maintain cosmic balance by directing individual power and preventing chaos. Each element was a vital component. The oral tradition was the processor, the symbols were the user interface, the calendar was the system clock, and the Jisa were the firewall and moral protocols. They all worked in concert to encapsulate a unified world, where nature, humanity, and the divine were inextricably linked. The ultimate purpose of this intricate system was protection. By refusing to write their knowledge down, by encoding it in poetry, landscape, and symbol, the Druids safeguarded it from corruption, dilution, and conquest. It was wisdom that had to be earned, understood from the inside, and lived in harmony with the world. To know the name of a god was not enough. You had to understand the quality of light at a specific solstice, the medicinal property of a plant growing on a sacred oak, and the personal taboo that kept a king humble before the land. This was the ancient code, a complete, self-reinforcing system for seeing the universe as a single, sacred, and intelligible whole. Their profound silence is precisely what gives them an eternal voice. We are drawn to the Druids not in spite of the gaps in the historical record, but because of them. A fully explained mystery loses its power, but a puzzle with missing pieces invites us to become participants, to fill the voids with our own longing. This is the core of their enduring allure. In a world saturated with information, where every fact is a click away, we ache for a different kind of knowledge, one that cannot be simply looked up. We yearn for wisdom that must be earned, that is felt in the bones and understood through a connection to the living earth. The Druids represent this lost paradigm. They stand as a powerful symbol of an intellectual tradition that was not separate from nature, but deeply embedded within it. Their sacred texts were the stars and the forests, a notion that resonates deeply in our age of concrete and screens. We romanticize their world as a purer, more authentic time, a pre-industrial past where life was harsh but meaning was clear and directly tied to the turning of the seasons and the health of the land. This romantic vision, while undoubtedly simplified, speaks to a very real human need for roots and for a sense of the sacred in the world around us. The fact that their true story is fragmented allows each generation to project its own hopes onto them. The 18th century revivalists saw fraternal order and ancient virtue. The environmental movement sees proto-ecologists. Spiritual seekers see a path of earth-based wisdom. The Druids become a mirror, reflecting our own cultural anxieties and aspirations. They are the ultimate blank slate, their silence a canvas for our collective imagination. We are not just learning about history when we study the Druids, we are exploring a part of ourselves, a deep-seated desire for a world where knowledge was sacred, where the natural world was alive with spirit, and where the great mysteries of life and death were held within a coherent, beautiful, and terrifying cosmic order. Their legacy endures not because we have all the answers, but because we are still captivated by the questions. We have journeyed through fragments of a lost world, from the biased pens of Roman historians to the silent testimony of bog bodies and the celestial alignments of stone circles. We have decoded the symbolic language of animals and the cryptic marks of Ogham, and we have traced the echoes of their philosophy in the haunting myths of heroes and seers. Each piece of evidence, from the bronze precision of the Coligny Calendar to the sacred prohibitions of the Jays, reveals a single, profound truth. The Druids' code was not a single secret to be found, but a magnificent tapestry. It was a living system where astronomy, law, medicine, and spirituality were inseparably woven together, threaded through an unbreakable oral tradition and stitched into the very landscape they held sacred. Their knowledge was not stored in libraries, but lived in the minds of the learned and breathed in the rustle of sacred oak leaves. They were the masterminds of a civilization that saw the cosmos as an interconnected whole, and their legacy is the haunting beauty of that vision. So the next time you stand in an ancient grove or look upon a weathered standing stone, try to see it with new eyes. See it not as a ruin, but as one remaining page from a vast, living library that once covered the land. We have gathered the scattered pieces, but the full picture is for you to contemplate. Tell us in the comments which thread of this ancient mystery pulls most strongly at your curiosity. Is it their formidable memory techniques, their advanced understanding of the stars, or their profound belief in the soul's journey? What piece of the Druids' lost knowledge would you most want to rediscover today?